All right, Rob, I really appreciate you joining me. I know we've been trying to have some form of an interview for maybe the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, but finally the stars have aligned a little bit. So
They
I'm
have,
really
yeah.
glad to have you on here.
Great. Well, very nice to be here. Thanks, Nicholas, for having me.
Yeah, of course. And we met online, I don't know how many months ago at this point. So it's really
Mm.
nice actually seeing you relatively in person at this point.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, this is it at the moment. The whole COVID thing. This is as
Yeah,
close as anybody can get. Doesn't the Atlantic doesn't change anything? It would be like this if we lived next door, you know. So yeah, yeah, that's
yeah.
true.
Although I might at least see you getting out, checking your mail or something. So
That is true.
we'd
Or
be a
we
little
could
closer.
hang a piece of string and two tin cans, you know, between the houses and just
I
just
think I
communicate
think
that
the audio quality on that might be a little worse though.
way. That's true. Yeah.
So how have you been keeping busy so far during COVID?
Well, I've been quite lucky. I've had a relatively busy year so far, which seems amazing. I mean, you know, it really, really does. I think it's been very fortunate. Um, at the start of the year, from January, I had a US TV show in, kind of like a sort of forensic, kind of scientific, kind of history investigation type series, um, and with a sort of Nordic noir style kind of score. You know, a bit of mystery, some nice atmospheric synthesizers and guitars and that sort of thing. Um, and then in late February, you know, with the kind of COVID thing happening, start of March, that stopped. They had to stop production because they, you know, like many people, they couldn't get into the edit facility. Um, and then, amazingly, a film came in, a feature, a US feature, um, and you know, I had to go through the kind of. It wasn't a pitch as such, but I sent a reel um, of kind of. It was a comedy, and I sent a reel that was quite. They'd seen Troop Zero, a film that I'd scored, so they were kind of interested in that. Um, and um, and I sent a reel that was, you know, comedy is a tricky genre, and I think for me anyway, the last thing that I wanted to do was anything that sounded too kind of jokey or funny or whatever. But I just sent some things that I thought were interesting and a little bit left field and quite quirky and you know, things that I thought were that they would find interesting sonically. Um, and really liked that. They really enjoyed it. So we got started pretty quickly. Actually, the film arrived fully finished at the start of March. Um, more or less. I mean, it was all done. It looked great. It hadn't been graded, but it looked really good. They had a finished edit, and it was fully temped um, from start to finish with tons of music. There's just loads and loads of music from the Grand Budapest Hotel, actually
Oh,
mainly,
okay.
which is a great score. You know,
Yeah.
really, and it's a great film, isn't it? And so. So that was a very different situation to the work that I did on Troop Zero, where, you know, as I've mentioned to you in private, I had started work on that film over a year before they started filming, just from the script. And there was no temp music at all. And it was all just written a lot from the script, and then some visits to New Orleans, and then coming back and working with the editors while they were still filming the film, just sending over pieces of music. And so by the time they got to their edit, there was a lot of music and all the main themes are written already. Whereas with this new film, um, it arrived completely temped. So very, very, very different. And then, you know, you, I suppose people might have different approaches to receiving a fully temped film. I'm going to use terms like temp because I presume everyone watching this would understand, you know, temp music, what that is.
Right.
Pieces from other films generally that are dropped in by the editors. And but you know, in my case, I just thought, well, I love that score. I absolutely love it. But it isn't. I mean, it's a very specific sound that he's gone for, you know, which
Right.
is brilliant. But it isn't right for this film. So that was good. You know, it was nice not to think, oh, I need to do anything at all like that. I just kind of, you know, sometimes you refer to tempos and things because it's been edited, or sometimes you don't, you know. And musically, what I did was extremely different to that, nothing like it at all. So that was good, and the director was great to work with. I mean, it was a very intense process. He was in LA, I'm here in the UK, and he is a really lovely guy, a very talented filmmaker who is very on top of music, and actually a really good music editor as well himself. Um, and I mean, we spoke all the time. We spoke. I worked 7 days a week for 3 months on that
Wow.
film. They were long hours. They were like 14-hour days. It was really intense because during that time it was extremely difficult to book any sessions, record anybody. So I had to do almost everything myself. Not everything. There were a few remote sessions that I managed to get together, but a lot of it I did myself, and it was quite slow, really. You know, programming things and me not necessarily being a virtuoso musician on certain instruments. It took a while to record things and whatnot. Um, and and then, you know, I'd be getting calls from LA at like, you know, 6 in the morning on a Sunday. I'd be getting them at 11 o'clock at night, you know, because you've got both ends of the day. And that's really fine. I'm not complaining, because those conversations were focused, and you know, the director was just a lovely guy to work with. But he, you know, but it wasn't. We spoke every day for 3 months. We just spoke all the time, and that went really well. It was great. I mean, I don't have any details of when that film is coming out as yet, but I think I'll find out soon. But it is all finished. So
Okay.
so then I finished that film in June, and just before finishing that, this US TV series came back to me, and they'd managed to get a kind of remote editing facility together, and they'd worked out a way of carrying on, and they were doing like a 4K edit, so it was quite hard for them. There's a lot of data to move around and that sort of thing, and so they waited for me, which was really great. So then, amazingly, then I got another month on that show. And then I went on holiday, which is, I haven't had a holiday in the summer for maybe 5 years. I'm always working, you know, I'm always working over the whole summer. And my kids go away with my wife, and, you know, it's a shame, but you know, we will, it's not a tragedy. We do get holidays, but for whatever reason, they don't tend to be in the summer. And so I was able to go away, and now I'm back. And there isn't a job in right now, but there are some potential things coming up. So I'm kind of doing this kind of, I suppose, typical composer thing of, there are some technical things to do. There are new hard drives to be fitted. There are things to be backed up from previous shows, new sample libraries to be installed. And then, you know, I'm listening to things, and I'm starting to put together some ideas. And, you know, I have a piano downstairs, so quite often I'll sit downstairs while, you know, I don't know, my kids are doing their homework or whatever, and annoy them. You know, you just sort of think of something, you just like sit and play a little thing, and then go back to it and keep going back to it. Because if I've got time, I could go back to it for a month, you know, and just keep playing it and just do little things or do variations, and then perhaps record those on the phone. You know, I'll often do that, just at the iPhone, and just stick it on the piano and just record a little thing and name it. And that's really, really useful, because then when it comes to a crunch time, when you're like, okay, we need themes, we need all this music, you've got this stock of things, and they're not just random things. You know, I'm thinking about projects and thinking, oh yeah, this, you know, once you start scanning and open yourself up to ideas and influences, then hopefully you can start to do it. So that's really where I am at the moment. But you know, it's a strange time. I think there's been a hole because of COVID. So, you know, I was lucky. I kind of got this work in, and I've been busy. And now I think I'm feeling a little bit of the hole that has happened. But I mean, what we're hearing is that TV production and film production are just ramping up, and everyone's getting back into it. And so things will start to feed through. It's just that music traditionally is kind of on the end, you know.
Right.
So although not always, hopefully. So yeah, so that's where I am at the moment.
Well, that is, I'm going to say that's a lot more than I was expecting. And I think a lot more going on than I've heard from most composers. So, I mean, that's really fortunate for you.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, I mean, how nice that you have, you know, 4 really busy months and then your European vacation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, an actual
So,
holiday.
you mentioned that you've been listening to things to kind of, get new ideas and see what's out there. I mean, what are some of the things that you've been listening to right now?
Well, so I mean, a film that I may, I don't want to presume, but there's a film that I'm interested in with directors that I've worked with before, and we've discussed that film to a degree, and I've had a script. Um, and that's a film that is set in the mid '80s on the west coast of America, um, and um, and so, as part of my research for what could be a score for that film, um, I mean, it's been actually, it's been announced, so it's not like it's not a secret film. Um, that is a film called A Special Relationship. It's about Elizabeth Taylor, and
Hmm.
up until now, the attached actress is Rachel Weisz. So it's a big deal, and and the story is kind of about Elizabeth Taylor and her assistant, who's a gay man. And it's kind of set around the time when the AIDS epidemic burst into the world, this terrible thing. Um, and of course, at the time, there's no cure. People just really don't know what to do. I mean, I suppose there are some parallels to what's happening with COVID, although well, it's very difficult to compare these things. I don't really want
Right.
to say which is the worst, but I mean, I remember, that time. I'm old enough to remember the mid '80s and how frightening it was for everybody. Um, and I guess because it was such a, you know, people who were ill with AIDS. I mean, they looked very ill, and you could sometimes you'd see people and you just didn't know what to do, um, and so anyway, as part of that, I've been listening to some things. There's a US label called Dark Entries, which mainly release kind of gay porn soundtracks,
Interesting.
and that will be kind of lots of electronic music, um, and it's quite interesting, really. I mean, there's a guy called Patrick Cowley who was a big kind of star of that scene and that label, and he'd worked with people like Sylvester. You remember the track "Mighty Real"? You make me feel mighty real. It's a really great track. It's a great.
I don't, but I'll look it up. And that
Well,
was
it's great. It's great,
a,
and
a better rendition than I was expecting live on
I mean,
camera.
the original's much higher. But and I remember going to see Sylvester in the '80s, and Divine. I saw Divine when he played, who's like John Walters, kind of
Hmm.
famous kind of film star, and also sort of singer and musician and things. Um, and um, and anyway, yeah. So I've been listening to a lot of that. I'm not sure if that will be part of what I'm going to do. I mean, it's not that I want to pastiche those things, um, but you sort of, I'm at this point, it's so far off, and it's not even a dead cert that I'll do it. I'm just open to. You just open yourself up like antennae, sort of scanning, and not try and be too prescriptive or be too sure of anything at this point. Just listening, and maybe you can sort of abstract out parts of that musical genre. I mean, I've been reading about things like people recording drums using, like, say, like a microphone, like an SM58 as the kick drum, um, and playing in sequences by hand instead of kind of everything super tight electronic sequency kind of sound. um, Things played by hand using delays and things to kind of give you that kind of metronomic thing, but it's still got a bit of that kind of soul by the fact that it isn't super tight. I think those things are interesting, and I mean, I'm looking up in the studio, I've got a Selena string ensemble from like sort of 1978. I've got an ETI 4600S international synth from 1975. There's a Moog Prodigy, there's a sequential circuits, all these kind of bits of gear are from those eras. Who knows, there might be a bit of Fairlight, and so that's interesting. So I'm kind of, there is that, and I'm combining those sort of, just listening kind of projects. I've made playlists and things on Spotify and listening on YouTube and whatnot. And finding that with just writing some melodies and just trying to get together some ideas that I may start to work up into some pieces that I may potentially play to the directors. So there's that, and then there are a couple of other things that may well be coming up, and so again, I'm just starting to sort of put together some sample libraries and listening and just try and keep these plates juggling, because you never know what's going to happen.
Right.
And then if one of those kicks off first, then it gives me something to start from. I've been pitching on a couple of things as well. I sent over some things for another US film, which I haven't heard back on, and I guess I haven't got. But that sounded really interesting. A young filmmaker who's a sound editor as well, and seems really into sound. And I think that would have been a really nice project, low budget, but really interesting artistically sort of project to work on. But that's just the way it is. We're all. I think you have to get into a mindset where you try not to care too much. There are certain things, like for instance with Troop Zero, I really, really wanted to do it, and because I thought the script was just great, and I just loved it, and I had such a time to kind of anticipate that project that it gave me plenty of time to get excited and have ideas. But yeah. So that's kind of it. So I've been listening to that, and then I'm listening to. You and I were talking before we started today. You were saying that you have the facility to listen to music while you work, and I think that's brilliant. It's great. I don't really have that. Many composers don't, because I can't hear any music at all. I can't even hear it. I can't hear anything in the house, or I can't hear my neighbors or any of that. If I hear any music, I'm not going to swear, but it messes things up. So that's tricky. But I will be listening to things. So I'll be listening to. There's a lot of work listening. There's lots of things where playlists are sent to me by music supervisors, and that can be really interesting. And then I'll also be listening to. I particularly I love Bowie. I love Germanic kind of what was called krautrock, which I don't know if you've come across that, but bands like Neu! And Faust.
I have a little bit, but it's one of those genres that is, it's when you dig a little deeper, it's such a big, important genre, and so many bands I've listened to are adjacent to that in some way. But it's just one of those where, for whatever reason, I haven't spent the time to really dig into it. So I know a couple bands like Faust and a few others.
Can, I guess.
Yeah,
Can are great, and Neu! I think as a guitar player yourself, I think Neu! Are really worth checking out. Michael Roter's a really great guitar player, and it's a really interesting sound. But yeah, and then I listen to all sorts of newer artists as well. I try to be listening. I thought the Kelly Lee Owens, it's very electronic, but it's also kind of ambient. It's got that kind of David Lynchy kind of thing going on. I thought it was really interesting. We talked about pop music. There's a band called Salt, SAULT, and they had a track called Wildfires, which was just this kind of really dark, atmospheric, very subtle kind of piece of pop. But great. You get bands like Idols that are just super powerful and energetic, and those things are really interesting. When you're thinking about film scores, that I have a band background anyway. That's where I came from, and so the energy that you get from some of that music is a really, really great thing. Trying to think, what else have I kind of been listening to? And obviously enjoying some film scores as well. I don't follow film scores particularly slavishly, because I'm not consciously not trying to emulate any of the composers. I know it sounds like holier than thou, but as you've probably seen yourself, I think there's a whole trend amongst people that like to specialize in, for instance, programming epic orchestral music. and people understandably want to try and sound like, say, aspects of somebody like Hans Zimmer, and that's a very common thing. I mean, I actually I love Hans Zimmer. I think he's a super talented composer. I love the fact that he, you know, although he's got his sound and his musical style, I just love the fact that he comes to each project and researches and just does such a good job of things. And he seems like a lovely guy as well. But again, I'm not trying to sound like him. I've no interest whatsoever in sounding like him, and I probably couldn't do it anyway. And so, but I do see a lot of people who want to do that. It's not for me to give anybody advice, but personally, I would say don't try and copy anybody else. What's the point? I mean, it's just you do your own thing, hopefully, and that's it. But
Well, it's interesting that you mention, you know, people copying or at least
yeah,
being very inspired by Hans Zimmer. But
yeah,
I think for a lot of those people, they're basing that off of the sound from his kind of like 21st century blockbuster scores.
totally, yeah,
But
yeah,
even if you listen to his scores from the 90s and the 80s, and they do have a very different sound. But I mean,
yeah,
he has a lot of more recent scores that sound so different. I mean,
totally, yeah,
not I don't want to stereotype you from being from the UK, but I mean, like he did The Holiday, which very different from what he normally does. I watched
yeah,
the Little Prince a few nights ago, so a
mm,
2015 animated film, and he co-composed the score on that, and I had I didn't realize it was him, but
mm.
it's this really delicate score that sounds so different from the kind of stereotype of this just crushing
Yeah,
sound.
totally. Yeah, yeah, that's right.
And,
Absolutely. And who's
and
to say what
oh,
he'll
go
do
ahead.
next? Yeah. No, no, no. You're right. And I think I guess people are listening to Dark Knight, or they're listening to Inception, which just
Hmm.
sounds incredible, and what a joy to listen to that. But yeah, you're right. They're like, wow, this is it. This is film scoring. That's it. Um, and that's an aspect of it, and it's very hard to do well. But there are plenty of other ways of
Right.
approaching things.
And I think that's something that people miss quite often. Getting more into film scoring is the almost necessity of being able to do so many different genres. I mean, you take
Yeah.
what you've been talking about. Troop Zero is very much a kind of modern bluegrass folksy, like a folksy Americana mix. But then here
Mm.
you are talking about another film there being kind of an 80s electronic
Yes.
influence.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I suppose that's true. I mean, there are, of course, there is something to be said for having your sound, you know,
Right.
um, and I mean, thinking about, for instance, Karen O's sound, from the Yeah Yeah Yeahs,
Hmm.
great band, really great band. I mean, her score to Where the Wild Things Are, it's it's got. I mean, it's lighter, and you can't imagine that she's now going to go on and do a kind of, I don't know, Brazilian kind of sort of tropicalia kind of sounding score. It's going to be, you know, you would be taking her on board to do her thing, I think.
Right.
um
And
and I
there's
think
certain
that's,
other composers like that. You get Philip Glass has been doing film music for
yeah,
40 years, but you're getting Philip Glass. We were talking
yeah,
about Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross earlier, and
yeah,
you know when you bring them on, you have an idea of the sound they're going to do.
yeah,
I mentioned when we were talking in private, you know, Harold Budd and Robin Guthrie. It's
oh
this
yeah,
like they bring their style, but I think it's and you mentioned Karen O also. A lot of these people are composers who have been making their own music and then jumping sort of tangentially into film scoring. And
yeah,
look, I'm sure there are examples of film composers starting out who just do their thing, and they manage to do that for 30 years really
yeah,
successfully. But
yeah,
I think it's tougher because at the end of the day, you're scoring for the film that
Yeah,
you're given, and for the the director that's in charge of it all. And they don't always want that style. Sometimes
yeah,
quite often they'll want something different, something that is more attuned towards these specifics of the film. So
yeah. Well,
it's
that's the thing,
I
isn't
think
it?
I think it's tough.
It's so nice when everything connects, and it's all bespoke and it's all for that thing. And it's, I suppose it's obvious, but it just makes sense on every level, every piece of that puzzle. I mean, that's when you see a great film, every single element of that film connects. Everyone's on the same page, which is a very,
Mhm.
very difficult thing to do. It's, I mean, one of the hardest things, I suppose, and this is why I guess when people develop long-term working relationships, this is why, because I think one of the hardest things is getting everybody to agree, when someone says green, that you don't mean blue. Everyone needs to know, everyone, like the costume designer, the script editor, everybody on that film needs to be pointed in the same direction. So hard, such a hard
Right.
thing to do, because you might think what everybody feels, but I guess that's the part of the director's challenge, really, whoever they are, to impart that kind of vision on everybody working on the thing. And as a composer, you hope to to speak and kind of discuss things and send musical ideas and things before anything gets started, so that you all have that vision together. And then that's great. And I think films really work the best when that happens. And when it doesn't, you're just like, oh god, that one piece, that's a bit but that happens as well, doesn't it? So it's
Right.
hard to make a good film, otherwise they'd all be great, and they're not.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm sure though, as the composer, when I don't know if you watch everything that you've scored after it's finished,
Yeah,
because I know that there are some people that just don't do that.
yeah,
Or, if they've acted in it, they don't want to see the finished product.
yeah.
But I mean,
Mm,
that's got to be so easy to do as a composer if you're watching the finished work and you go, "Oh, did I really put, that cue in there, or, this melody, or,
yeah.
because it's
Well,
it's
yeah.
it's easy to infinitely critique whatever you've done."
It is. I mean, in my personal experience, my take on that would be, um, I don't know. You might have been convinced to drop particular sound, or something, and looking back on it, you might, or put something in, you might, that might be something that every time you watch it, you could think, oh, I could have done that, or if you, for whatever reason, don't happen to be at the mix, um, then you're just never sure what you're going to get back, because So I personally, if I can be at the mix, I mean, a lot of people don't want composers to be at a mix. I can understand why, but it depends on the person. I'm pretty easygoing, and I'm not sitting at the back going make music loud all the time, or any of
Right.
these cliches. I think that it's good to have your composer there if you can, because quite often, for instance, cues are meant to be really quiet. You've written something, it's not supposed to be this big loud crashing thing. It's supposed to be really quiet, or there are lots of little things that matter. They may not matter to everybody, but they do matter. So if you can be there, then it's I think for everybody it's a really good thing. And but usually, I mean, hopefully you have time during the process of writing and recording the music to, if there's something you feel really strongly about, you should talk about it then. Hopefully you've got a good relationship and it just
Right.
flows quite naturally. So
It's
that's
it's interesting that you mention, that some directors don't like the composers being at the mix.
mm.
I watched the film Capone,
Oh yeah.
that came out earlier this year, and it was
mm.
actually scored by LP. I don't know if you're familiar with him. It's kind of an
Mm.
American hip hop rapper
Yeah,
and producer,
I haven't
and
seen the film, but yeah.
I mean, it's a really it's a the score surprised me so much because I've listened to some of his music, with his group Run the Jewels, and I
Yeah,
mean, I think it's really good,
yeah.
but I had no idea what to expect because I mean, it's a film set in I think it's the late 40s,
Sounds like a good
and
idea. In all honesty, my initial reaction is that sounds like a good idea, because it sounds tough. Sounds like it's got attitude. You know, I'd
Yeah,
be
I
more
mean, and
interested in
and you
hearing.
know what? He just did a great job,
Yeah,
but because I'd listened to the score on its own and then watch the film, and that was something that I noticed in the
yeah.
film is the level of the score is quite often so low that it
Oh,
gets
is it?
mixed in with background noises, and so I actually ended up watching the film using my headphones because I could crank
Okay.
up the volume and hear
Yeah.
it a little better, and it comes through more that way, and it's a more
Mm.
complex dynamic sound. But if you're just watching on a computer or your TV that has just kind of a standard speaker, you don't hear a lot of it, and
Yeah.
so it's
Yeah.
I don't know. I imagine it's tough because especially if you're intending a film to be shown at a movie theater, the sound quality of a theater setup is hopefully much better than what the average person has at home. And
Yeah.
so in an ideal world, you're building it for that, and it's going to have this really just deep sound, and it's going to hit all the levels,
Mm.
and
Mm.
it'll be heard in a way different from at home. But
Yes.
I think it's got to be tough setting those mixes now because especially in the time of COVID, where so many things skip the theatrical release now and go straight to
Yeah.
streaming,
Yeah. Yeah.
that at what point does the director, the composer, the sound design, maybe the cinematographer have to consider the home release above the
Yeah.
theatrical release?
Yeah. I don't. I mean, I really don't know. I think it's quite difficult. Yes, it is. It is difficult. But you hope that. I mean, even a TV with a sound bar and a sub, it's a pretty good sound.
Yeah,
You're still getting a pretty good sound as long as you're listening to that at a decent volume. Um, what can you do?
right.
It's just. I mean, some people are going to watch it on a laptop. Someone's going to watch it on an iPhone. You just there's just one of those things. But I guess people still aim high, and then it's diminishing returns as you go
Yeah,
down.
but
But
I know
a
there's
good film's still a good film. So what the hell?
exactly. But I know
You
there's
watch
there's people
Raging Bull
like
on an iPhone, it's still great.
yeah,
So
yeah. But then you get someone like David Lynch who is so anti watching things on your phone, and that
mm,
the way, but it makes sense just with how he is. But I mean, he's never going to make a film or a series or anything with the idea of watching it on your phone. I think the closest thing he'll do is he has a daily YouTube series, and that is more lenient towards how you consume it.
okay, he did that thing as well, didn't he? What was it called? Was it called something like This Island Earth or something? It was a kind of a thing that he filmed
Hmm.
using like 80s VHS cameras, I
Interesting.
think. And I might be wrong, but my memory of that is that the visual quality is quite deliberately fuzzy. A bit like you used to. I mean, you may not remember, but in the days of like VHS cassettes, they would be watched so many times. They'd be rented and watched over and over again. It meant that horror films like Cannibal Holocaust, I Spit on Your Grave, all these horrific
Yeah.
titles of films. They were kind of given a kind of an additional sort of cachet and mystery because they just were a little bit fuzzy. You couldn't see, the fact that in fact it's someone wearing a rubber suit, with like tomato ketchup on their arm. It just looked kind of real, and the sound was all kind of fuzzy as well. It was quite a cool
So
thing.
that's
But
that's interesting, especially for Cannibal Holocaust, where it's I don't know what to say whether it's the original or not, but I mean it's one of the like really early found footage type films, and
yeah,
so that I mean one of the like big controversies was, oh, how much of this was actually real? Like, did they really
that's right.
impale this
Yeah,
person?
mm,
And so having it on that fuzzier quality, it
exactly.
it
Yeah,
adds a level of authenticity, especially at that time.
yeah, 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 definitely. Yeah.
So
So
we
it's
were you were talking about kind of collaboration, how all that works in. I know that you've done a lot of films for the director duo Burt and Birdie, especially
yeah,
Troop Zero being the latest one. I mean, has that kind of long tenured collaboration really streamlined the process for you?
yeah, completely. Yeah, it's great. We've worked together now for I'm not sure 16, 17 years, and the first things that we did, they had we did some no budget or low budget I worked on their first short film that they made, and subsequent shorts that they made. Um, and I mean, we pretty much hit it off straight away. They're kind of really open-minded, really creative, very, very open to conceptual kind of ideas, and they're absolutely definitely not looking for a recreation of anything else musically or sonically. They appreciate things that are quite original, and so we worked on those films, and looking back on them, they still stand up. I mean, I worked on lots of short films, and some of them, it was a learning experience, but they were okay. But the ones with Bert and Bertie were really good, and they're still really good. They had a kind of a bit of a Genet thing going on, a bit like Delicatessen, that kind of thing initially, and then they kind of developed from there, but visually very strong right from the off. And just good ideas, they just got good ideas. And then we did some of the bits and bobs, a little bit of TV, a little bit of advertising, and then they left the UK and they moved to the States. And fortunately, we continued to stay in touch. They got their first feature when they moved there, which was for YouTube Red, the monetized YouTube channel, and that was a film called Dance Camp, and it, not exactly their thing. They were just brought in as directors. They didn't write the script, but they did a good job. They did a really good job, and it looks good, and it's funny, and there's a lot of licensed music in that film. But I did some work on it, and there was another musician, a guy called Graham Combs, who worked with me on that as well. And we just did some work on that kind of across the Atlantic, and so we established that could work. Then I did some more. We did a few they produced a couple of TV pilots, and I did some work with them on those. And we've just done everything together, really. We've done other things, like I've done a lot of work on one project in particular, which hasn't happened yet, but I know it's on the back burner, and there's been some good musical work done, and they've done some really nice work on it. And so, so you can never presume, I'll never presume that they will continue to work with me, but so far things have gone well and we really enjoy it. So that's great. I'd be very happy to continue working with them. I mean, they've announced a couple of things that they're doing. They're actually going to direct 3 of the new Marvel Hawkeye episodes for Disney and for Apple. But I mean, I think it's early days. I'm not sure what's happening with that. And then, they've got this other film coming out, and then they've got various other things that they're working on. They're just really, really busy. So anyway, that's been really good. And I think hopefully they would agree. You do develop a shorthand, and it's, it proved to be quite easy to, you know what you're getting into. I'm sure they do as well. If we've got a new thing coming up, I think we could just be on a call straight away and we'd be off. There's no sort of trying to establish a common language. So that's good. Having said that, I mean, the last film I worked on, Randy, the director, was a really easy guy to work with. Luckily, he knew what he wanted. He'd written the script, he'd co-written the script, he'd co-edited the film. He was an experienced filmmaker and was good with music as well. And so, it certainly wasn't a struggle to work with him. He's a different thing. That's a new relationship.
Right.
But maybe that's fortunate that he happened to be a really good guy and knew what he was doing, which was great. So I suppose you never know. You've all got to. It's ideally you find people that you chime with. Culturally you get on. You have the same sense of humor, same aesthetic kind of values and things. I think if I was a director, I wouldn't be as interested in hearing pitches for things or demo music or anything as I would be with sitting down and talking to people and just getting a feel for them, and just wanting to know, do we have things that we like in common? Can I feel that you understand me? Can we talk? Because I would say most proficient composers can get to an end. You know, it's not like we're a library. We don't have to have the music written right now. You know, you can work with me on something, and even if it isn't right now, in a week's time, hopefully it will be right, you know, because we'll work to an end. But I suppose there's a degree of trust involved there, you know, and directors have to kind of give up, and
Right.
you know, when they decide to work with somebody, they need to feel that they'll get what they need. You know, there's a lot of pressure there. But yeah, but you're
Especially,
right,
no,
it's great.
I was gonna say, especially because the scoring is generally, one of the aspects that the director can't really directly intervene in. If they're
Yeah,
like they can get in the editing room, they can take over the cinematography, they can take over all of these things, but
yeah,
they can give you feedback on the music. And
yeah,
in very rare cases that they step in, like I know Charlie Chaplin was famous for that, but
yeah,
I mean that's going way back. It's
yeah.
it's something that's just pretty out of their hands. So yeah, there does, I mean, I imagine there does have to be a pretty strong level of trust there.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you know, I suppose the extreme example of that would have been, you know, somebody like, you know, Bernard Herrmann just kind of turning up with a finished score that no one's heard, basically, apart from a few melodies, you know, on a piano, um, and and you know, on the day, a few bits and bobs can be tweaked, but time is money. You've got a whole orchestra sitting there, you
Right.
know, and thankfully the work is stunningly amazing, and you're lucky to have it anyway. Um, but but you know that, I mean, things are different now because people like to hear things mocked up and things, but I mean that really is the utmost trust, isn't it? I mean, personally I'd be into that, you know, I just like the idea of it, but you know, I guess there's financially it's quite a risky thing to do. Yeah,
See, I mean, I just love how open you are to these, experimental approaches. Just like how we were talking earlier about, you know, Neil Young just showing up, improvising the whole score to
yeah,
Dead Man, and then dusting his hands off and walking away. I
yeah.
mean, I don't know. I don't know how the outcomes would generally be, but I don't know. It just sounds like it'd be a very interesting way to kind of expand how film scores are done.
Absolutely, and not, you know, I mean, I went to art college, not to music college, and so I guess I have that in me, and um, I'm personally, I'm interested in not necessarily controlling everything. I like to be surprised, you know, and maybe set up systems where things can go wrong, or they can do something that isn't just a sort of repetitive action. You know, it may throw up something that you find interesting, or somebody records something, or something's improvised, and you take this thing and then you manipulate it and find something new. I think a lot of people enjoy that kind of thing, rather than, you know, controlling every single thing, writing it all out, and having it precisely reproduced. You know, it's another thing, and it's all great. I've got no axe to grind. I really don't care. But for me,
Right.
I like to be excited by, you know, experimenting and things that I haven't necessarily completely drilled out. I mean, I do. There is some of that as well. You know, it isn't all just random. Um, Particularly with writing melodies and things like that. But it's exciting. It's fun if you, especially if you can get some time, and it's great to do that sort of thing for everybody, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'd be more predisposed to like it because I've listened to so much experimental music over the years, but
Yeah,
I'm certain that would just drive some like classical film score purists
yeah, totally.
crazy.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. But
it's
that's
it's
okay,
like
you know.
everything. It's an evolving form.
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting time as well, isn't it, for film music? You know, I think that as you've seen, you know, there are whole branches, aren't there now, of kind of sound based, you know, scores. You know, Chernobyl being the most
Mm,
obvious one, um, and even things like, you know, Under the Skin, where you've got, you know, I mean, Michel Levy really is a, you know, classical composer, but I mean, it's such an original sound. You know, it's like, wow, that's a knockout. You know, when you hear those things, wow. Or I don't know if you saw The Lighthouse.
yeah,
Um, Great film. You know, I love that
yeah.
film. It really made me laugh, and not just laugh, but I thought it was great, you know, on so many levels. And I really enjoyed the score, you know, and a lot of that score is, I think, I don't know if you read, but I think he had a kind of like this box with like bits of metal and springs and all sorts of things that are being tortured, and you can hear it. It's great. You know, it's a great great sound. I
Yeah,
was a bit disappointed he didn't get more awards for that score actually, because I thought it was really brave and worked really well actually in the film.
it was interesting because yeah, I think he calls it the apprehension engine.
Right, yeah, great.
And I know Milan Records has released like a demo of him just playing on it for 10 minutes, maybe
Yeah,
6 or 8 months ago, and it's such a fascinating thing. But yeah, no,
yeah,
I agree. I mean, because he did The Witch, I don't know when that was, 4 or 5 years ago, which
yeah.
that score got a lot of attention, and
Mm,
then I don't know. I think there was a lot of anticipation for The Lighthouse and for his score, and yeah, I mean, oddly, it kind of came and went, and I know that was definitely one of my favorites from last year,
yeah,
and I love how it's this. I hate using the word soundscape because it's such an overused term, but I mean
mm,
it's very much that, and then these kind of sounds come in that almost embody the just like deafening roar of this lighthouse and its kind
yeah,
of like monolithic presence, and it's such an interesting way to use sound and kind of like palettes as your motifs and themes
yeah,
rather than just like a like here's the lighthouse melody, here's the seagull melody. It's like nope, there's just
yeah,
this sound that's going to crush you, and
yeah,
that sound and that tone, like that's the lighthouse. And
yeah,
I mean
yeah,
I loved
totally.
it.
Yeah, yeah, it was great, really, really great. I thought Midsummer was a great score as
Hmm.
well, and a great film.
Yeah,
Really, really exciting. The whole thing was exciting actually. So yeah, it's a good time. Um, and it's interesting, isn't it? I've been listening back to quite a lot of 80s, not listening back, but watching quite a few 80s films because I've got youngish children, and you want to play them various films, show them various films, and it's so interesting to see how things moved on. I mean, there were a lot of. I suppose it was a time when, for instance, there were people that had just got a synclavier, or they just got a Prophet 6, or they just got this piece of equipment, and a director would come to the studio and it's like, my God, that's incredible, I've never heard that thing, it's really great. And so yeah, some of those scores hold up better than others, don't they? Some of them are, maybe
yeah.
haven't aged so well, but no, I think it's an interesting, really interesting time now. And you do get that kind of art school approach going on, as well as more traditional kind of melodic and kind of classical scores. It feels like a really open field, and good for it really. So yeah, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, and I think from an audience perspective, I understand kind of people's tastes can be quite pigeonholed, but I
Mm,
mean, even this year alone, there's just been a really good mix of styles that have come out. I mentioned LP score for Capone, but at the
mm,
beginning of the year, you had Christopher Willis release a score for the personal history of David Copperfield. I mean,
yeah,
and he's an incredible composer, and that
yeah,
is such a good score in the much more traditional orchestral sense. And then I think
mm,
a few months later, you had this Scottish electronic musician, Blank Mass, release his score for Calm with Horses, which is just like
yes,
the exact opposite. But
mm,
again, it's a really good score too. It's obviously it drew the ire of the more purist people, but
yeah,
you know there's I think particularly now and as time's going to go on, there's just that variety coming out of
yeah,
really really good scores for
yeah.
whatever
And
you're
I
interested
mean,
in.
I suppose you wonder whether the whole COVID thing. I know people are starting to readjust now, and sessions are being booked, but I'm not sure. Maybe there will be more, kind of electronic and kind of smaller scores, more intimate sort of sounding scores that are recorded in studios like this. Because practically you can get it done. You can do it, and it's just a different approach. I mean, you'll always need bigger kind of Abbey Road style sort of things, but it might be a positive thing. It might be an interesting thing to force people to do more of that sort of work. So
Right.
yeah, yeah,
But then everything's cyclical, so maybe that happens for the next 5 years, and then in 20 years every big film and big score is like
sure,
orchestral 50 pieces.
yeah,
Who knows? But I mean, as someone who likes listening to the whole array. As long as good music comes out, I'm happy. Doesn't it
Yeah,
really doesn't matter the style.
yeah. Oh no, true. Absolutely, I
Yeah.
agree. Yeah, totally.
And I don't want to butter you up too much, but that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about Troop Zero was just the style of it. I mean, it's so fitting for the kind of rural Georgia setting, but
Yeah.
you don't hear kind of a more like acoustic country bluegrassy folk mix in film music.
No, and you probably noticed, that score has two distinct halves, really. You have the kind of, you have those moments where Christmas Flint, the main protagonist, this little girl, is kind of addressing the cosmos, or Viola Davis, occasionally they're there, they're talking to the stars, they're trying to communicate with whatever's out there. And you have that sort of cosmic country, I called it, sort of element, where it's a mixture of pedal steel and traditional instruments, but with like shortwave radio broadcasts and electronics and mellotrons and Moog synthesizers, and they're all mixed together, and that's quite an unusual sort of style. I mean, I didn't take that from any other musical genre. It was more conceptually, what could that be? We're in the mid 70s, we've got the stars, but we're in Georgia. What happens if we put them all together? What does that sound like? I don't really know, but we'll find out. And that made a really interesting sound, and I think a really emotional sound. That cue, we are here,
Yeah.
and things that they got me every time I heard them. They made me feel emotional, exhausting, after 3 months. And then the other side of that score is the kind of simple lo-fi crunchy diddly bows and kind of slide guitars and just handheld percussion and those things that were recorded really quite simply, but with some great musicians, and and then of course the whole David Bowie thing, going through the film. I mean, there's some great amazing to have sort of
Yeah.
licensed David Bowie tracks, and then I got to record a version of Space Oddity, um, which I spent a very long time on, and found myself in a room in New Orleans doing like Space Oddity version 123, like I was in some kind of J.G. Ballard novel, in this weird high-rise hotel, just doing Space Oddity over and over again for a really long time. And but but yeah, I mean, that there was a lot of scope in that thing, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I think to unite those things, that's I think that's really interesting, and I think it worked really well. And of course, listen to me, I shouldn't be doing that, but it required a lot of research and working with some great musicians. There's a guy called Nick Pinn who is a super multi-instrumentalist who played on a lot of stuff, and some of the great people. And so yeah, you where there's a will, there's a way. You do get there. So yeah.
It's funny, you saying you've done like doing 100 some odd versions of Space Oddity. I mean, that sounds like a type of hell almost, like taking as a Bowie fan, I presume that you love that song, but like
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
so having you just do something that you love over and over. I mean, to me, it seems like you'd get to a point where you almost can't stand
No, it isn't like that at all, actually.
it.
And I mean, the really, the terrible thing perhaps is that if you were my neighbor, and you could hear what I do, it might drive you insane. You might hear me listening to the same 4-bar thing all day long, just changing it teeny little bit, play it again, just find it really interesting. I do it again the next day, absolutely fine, no problem. Do that for a week, that's all good. But for any other normal human, listening to somebody do that, you just think, well, that's just a terrible torture. That's how they get information out of people, by playing them that kind of stuff. But it isn't really like that. I don't know why, but you just sort of you get into the details, and it becomes very, very interesting. And I think with Space Oddity, I loved the sound that we got with it. I thought it sounded really good, and I do say much so myself, but and I didn't play everything on it, so I can appreciate what other people did on it. And a lot of those things then are kind of working with the edit and just trying to make it work with the film, because the edit will change and you have to react to it, and
Hmm.
sometimes that can be quite challenging to manage to kind of move things around and get them to still work musically. So there is that. No, I really didn't mind actually. It was good, and it was nice to be in New Orleans. It was great to be in New Orleans. I'd never been there before. Have you been there?
Oh, yeah, I've been there a couple times.
Right, what a great town.
Yeah.
I just thought it was fantastic and really friendly, racially mixed, um, just welcoming, so musical. I had quite a bit of time there on my own, because sometimes in the evenings when they were doing night shoots and things, I just kind of drift off, and and then I'd go out to some little sweaty kind of bar club where there was some tight little kind of soul band playing or whatever, or jazz, or I did that thing where they have the second line where there's a march through the city with musicians at the front. And I mean, the second day I was there, I just turned up to that and followed them for miles. And it was just one of the greatest things. It was just wonderful, brilliant players. It was really warm, as it always is in the summer in New Orleans. And it was just an absolute joy, to do that. Very inspiring, actually, to be there. And then just to, be part of the whole thing, and the countryside and the humidity and the foliage and everything. It was. I mean, it's if you can do it, if for any of the composers, if you can get out on sets and get to where they're making the film, I think it's extremely useful. I mean, you don't always get the opportunity to, but it's really brilliant, because you get a proper understanding of what it's like, on the ground, and hopefully that can inform what you're doing. I don't know if I'm not sure. I haven't really spoken to other composers about it. I'm not sure if other people get into doing that kind of thing. I suppose most of us are just in a room for our whole lives, but they let you out, then
I
do it.
think I think from what I've heard, and obviously I've talked to a very very small subset,
Mm,
more formally, and I think it's a mix. I think some people, like, literally like you said, just sit solitary for 2 months and just crank out the score, and that's
yeah,
it. And some are more involved, or they are on set a couple times, very briefly to see how things are.
yeah,
But I mean, look at that. That kind of makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, you're involved in the production process, and I mean, not only would it, I imagine, be helpful, but I imagine you'd be interested to see what's going on. I mean, it's part
yeah,
of what you're making.
yeah. There is a. You realise that there's a lot of waiting around, which but with another thing with Troop Two, I'd written a song that was to be sung by cast members, so I was there with a megaphone, in front of like vast amount of people, teaching them this song and kind of helping them with that as well as we recorded the vocals for Space Oddity with the actors there. So I was there to do that as well. So there was quite a bit to do as well. So it was a good combination of things. But I'd try and do it again if they'd have me. I'd definitely come out, because I just think it's a very different experience to just getting a film that just arrives and you're on the other side of the world and like off you go. Yeah, it's a good thing. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, was it? So first off, I'll say my wife's also a big Bowie fan,
Oh,
so
great. Yeah, good.
you also have her stamp of approval and everything.
Great. Good.
But I mean, was that daunting? Like, not just kind of doing your own version of it, but also
Hmm.
knowing that your music was going to be appearing kind of side by side with the selection of Bowie songs.
Yeah. Um, Well, no. I mean, I really love David Bowie. I really, really do. I'm not just saying that. I mean, I've had moments of kind of epiphany, listening to Bowie albums where I've just thought, wow, it's blown my mind. I'm thinking particularly of the album Scary Monsters, where I remember the moment I heard that, and I just could not believe it. I just thought it was incredible. It's got that kind of distorted Robert Fripp thing going on, and Bowie's voice is so processed, and you've got these strange sounds and just great songs, and it's just amazing. It really is such an amazing album. And then all the Berlin albums, and kind of, so I mean, basically everything. I'll even like fight for the '90s music, and I mean, I thought his final album was, I actually couldn't listen to it when he died. And I left it, and then I've only recently been able to go back to it, because I just felt so kind of moved by the whole thing, and I just think that's brilliant. And the way he kind of, in a very quiet and dignified way, kind of as an artist, just neatly, summed up his life artistically and died. I mean, it's like, Christ Almighty, who is this guy? It's such a thing, and I wish he was still here. But yeah, so no, I was just really, really happy to be part of that, and to have that as part of the film. And then, the truth is, I mean, working on a version of Space Oddity, um, you know, it was fine because it's just an interesting thing to do, and it's kind of in my ballpark. It's not like I've come from a band background originally, so to produce a piece of music like that, I kind of know how to do it. It's just you have to get it done, but I know what's involved to do that, and I love it anyway. So, if you ask me to reproduce something by John Williams, then I'd probably have, be worried about it. But no, a Bowie track, I was just very happy to do it and just get the right players and get the right studios and do all that stuff. It was just a pleasure to do it. So no, that was fine. And then the score is the score. It's not licensed music, and it stands on its own, and that's the way it should be. So that was fine as well. I mean, but it was great. It was great to have those Bowie tracks. It's amazing, isn't it? To have that in a film, it's a really really big deal. And we had a great music supervisor on that film. There's a guy called Jake Vugarides, who was with Amazon, and really lovely guy, really positive, and very, very helpful. And he did some great deals and just got us these great licensed tracks. I mean, there's that Elvis, that gospel kind of Elvis track in the film as well. I can't remember what it's called now, but I didn't know that part of Elvis's back catalogue. But it's brilliant. It's really, really brilliant. And there are online, you can hear him doing those gospel things. You can find film of him and like 3 or 4 other guys just doing this doo-woppy kind of gospel stuff. It's really great. I didn't know it at all, and it works really, really well in the film. So yeah, it's nice. I guess when you've got a budget to license some great tracks,
right,
and you've got a good, talented music supervisor, and the directors have got good taste and whatnot, then it's just a pleasure to be part of that, really. So no, it's good, all good.
I mean, and like I said, and I told you this, months and months ago too. It all turned out really well. It was a real joy to hear, and I think I'd actually told you that I listened to the score, told my wife about it, and then we watched the movie afterward, and
oh, cool, great.
Both really liked it, and
yeah.
it's such a nice kind of balance of like comedy and lightness, and also those heavier moments, especially that kind of climax that you mentioned earlier of the point where they're looking at the sky saying we are here. I mean,
that's right.
It was a really just really lovely film.
Yeah, it's got a good heart, that film, and the sentiment of just being different, being a weirdo, is a thing to be proud of. Is a great thing. And without putting any kind of negative slant on things, some people hated the film. The kind of, I would say, the kind of more conservative sort of maybe more religious kind of right wing sort of audience weren't too happy with some of the things in the film. But maybe that's the mark of a good film as well, that it isn't a sort of a bland thing that everybody just, it washes over people, but some people have a good, strong, positive reaction. Some people have a strong kind of negative reaction to it. So it certainly had that as well. But generally, that film's gone down really well, and I believe the viewing figures have been great. And I think Amazon was super happy about it, which is nice. So they were good people to work with as well. Yeah, great.
See, that's great, and that's I hear people and their experiences working with Netflix quite often, but not as much with Amazon. I think just because Netflix does so much, and Amazon is kind of working on that. Same with Apple, and I imagine Hulu's the same. And so it's really nice to hear that the experience was really good. I mean, I think those studios are almost taking an opposite approach compared to the kind of classic studio system of giving a lot more leeway to their creators, and I think from an audience perspective, it's so nice.
You've totally hit the nail on the head, and I don't think I expected that. I wasn't sure what to expect. But in the end, it turned out that they were really what you would call kind of cineasts. You know, they were people that were
Mm.
real fans of cinema. They gave the directors tons of creative freedom and support. And the same with the score. You know, I had a very easy ride with that score. Obviously, there was a lot of creative to and fro with the directors, um, and that was good. But with in terms of producers and things, they were quite hands off until very near the end, and then there were some comments and things. But it was all good, constructive, positive stuff, and made it very very enjoyable actually. So yeah, no, it's great, really really good, and yeah, there we are.
Great. So I think at this point we've gone for well over an hour, and I think
Yeah,
adding on our
that's
conversation
enough for
earlier,
anybody.
it's gone a while. I mean, and it's too bad because I'd love to just hit turn off the record and keep chatting because I feel like we
Yeah,
could for quite a while, but it's as recording it's a Monday, it's the middle of the day for you, it's getting to late morning for me.
yeah,
Um, so, you know, I don't know. We'll cut it short now. Maybe next time I'm in the UK. Hopefully, it's in a post-COVID environment. I'll
yeah. That
give
sounds
you
good.
a knock on your door.
Yeah, do please do. That would be great. And yeah, thanks. It was great today. Nice to chat.